Howdy, with this video, I want to go over essay number 3, the poetry essay, and make sure you understand what you're supposed to be doing there. Before I do that, I want to go over the schedule, make sure we're all on the same page there as well. For Tuesday, November 3rd, I'm doing this video on Sunday, November 1st. The first two paragraphs of essay number 3 are due. And these may be, just like before, these may be a little rough. I don't want to make sure you've picked the poem you're going to use and make sure you kind of understand how the assignment's supposed to work. For Friday the 6th, the full draft of essay number three is due. Once again, we'll do the peer reviews, same format as the previous ones. Nice one about this essay is there's not too much of an MLA component. There's no research involved in this essay, so makes it a little quicker to review and everything. Peer reviews due on Tuesday. The final version of the essay is due on Friday. Kind of notice Friday the 13th. It's kind of a big day there. We got to have the final version of essay number 3 in, or do a best to. I'm gonna post the final exam, and that's the last day for any and all late work. So if you have any missing assignments, Friday the 13th, it's kind of an easy day to remember when all this stuff's due. Then on the 17th, the final exam's due. Response number 11 is due. Response number 11 is just going to be a questionnaire about the course. Were there any readings you just absolutely hated and I should remove? Are there any problems with the course? Is there anything else you want to see on D2L? Questions like that. Another way students in previous classes have answered those questions is why we're doing what we're doing in this course to some extent. For the final exam, I already gave you the questions in YouTube video number 5. I'm sure you remember that well. Seems like forever ago, right? But let's just get into those questions of essentialism versus anti-essentialism, or truth versus relativism. And that question of free will versus determinism. And just going to, basically that's what the question is going to be. Kind of discuss one of those two ideas as they run through maybe 3 works we've read this semester. Something like that. So no big surprises on the final. It will be an essay final. I'm not going to ask you, what was the cat's name in A Good Man's Hard to Find or something like that. For essay questions, we have time to think about it and come up with a pretty good response. I can kind of see for the final exam, it's not worth as much as the essays. It's going to be, something you're going to write a little more quickly, and might be, I don't say rougher, but there might be a few spelling errors and stuff because you're all working hard right now towards the end of the semester. But still worth a 10% of the grade, so can't blow it off either. But that's the schedule. After that, you're just waiting for me to grade stuff, and I'll try and have grades posted on Tuesday the 24th, and that'll be it. I'll give you a day or two before I submit grades to Northeast State to know if there's any mistakes or problems with any of the work I send back to you. And you're kind of noticing it's not an easy 3 weeks, but hopefully it kind of feels a little more downhill than maybe the first 2 essays. And that's kind of by design. Keep in mind at the beginning of the semester, they really didn't have a clue how the semester was going to end, what they were going to have us be doing. So we wanted to finish a little bit early, and we stayed on schedule, so we're going to finish a little bit early, and that's kind of nice, right? Just kind of worked out that way for us. But to get to essay number 3, the poetry essay, all this is up there under material for poetry essay on the content page. Make sure you can see that. Yep. And don't click on the poetry essay assignment. Make it big. And for this essay assignment, there's no research involved, which is kind of good, kind of bad. Can't rely on research because this just be you and the poem. But you're going to write an 800-word minimum explication of one of the following poems. And what an explication is, it's a line-by-line or stanza-by-stanza analysis of a poem. And it's also your response to the poem. So it's a little bit of reader response, a lot of analysis. But you're going to take us from the beginning of the poem to the end of the poem and tell us what you see happening in the poem and how the poem functions, all that kind of good stuff. And really what an explication, a literal definition, is it's an unfolding of the poem. If you're like me and you like summarizing things instead, this can be a little harder, can be a somewhat difficult assignment. But the trick is you got to kind of unfold the poem, discuss where you're getting your ideas from, and tell us what's happening in the poem. And it's a good critical thinking skill. If you ever have to go fire somebody when you become a manager, you got to write that out and explain. You just can't say he's a jerk. You got to sit there and write pretty detailed unfolding of why this person needs to be fired and let go, or else you're gonna get hosed on the unemployment insurance, right? Same way if you become an engineer and the bridge collapses, you can't just go like the bridge fall down, go boom. They're going to want you to explain and unfold what happened within that process that caused that bridge to collapse. which hopefully never happens, obviously, right? But same kind of idea here. You're trying to show us how the poem works, and particularly in terms of your personal response to it. You got 8 poems to choose from. You're going to choose only one of those poems. Don't try and do 2. That's a good way to fail the essay. You're just going to look at one poem. Also, you probably don't want to use 2 poems, right? And should not include any biography or research. Most of these you can't. You can on something like The Descent. William Carlos Williams was a fairly famous poet. But don't go online and start doing research. If I catch you doing research, that's a quick 0, and you'll get a horrible email that says, hey, I'm not grading that essay. You got to do another one on a different poem. That's assuming we have time to do that. So no research of any kind. Make sure you have all the punctuation. Once you use at least 7 of the poetry terms, and there's a little handout there that on the content page for that. And of course, no it or you in the explication. Just go to the poems real quickly. Damp, Virginia, late summer. If you've never been to Damp, Virginia, it's a small coal mining town in southwest Virginia, and the poem kind of talks about what's happening there. You're going to see that all these are open form poems. They're generally not rhyming or regular line length. A Woman with Black Balloons by G.N. Wagner. Interesting little poem. Some of these you're going to read and kind of go like, yeah, no. If you read the poem, just kind of like, I have no clue what's happening here. Well, you got 7 others to choose from. If you do that with all 8 poems, then you got to go back and kind of say, well, wait a minute, I got to pick one of these and buckle down and figure out which one I want to work with. But just kind of discussing how we use black balloons, what they mean, and kind of taking us on our own personal journey about her reactions to these balloons she sees on the street. The Dog in the Night. And also, as you're kind of looking at these poems, some of these will just kind of organize themselves. There's no set paragraph number for this essay. But generally, my recommendation is to go stanza by stanza if you can. So like in this Woman with Black Balloons, there's 1, and stanzas just collections of lines, right? There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stanzas in that poem. You might just end up doing a 6-paragraph essay. Spend a paragraph on each stanza. It's kind of a neat way to do it. Same thing with Damp, Virginia, Late Summer. You got 5 stanzas there. You might just spend a paragraph on each stanza, and that's how you're going to organize your essay. Something different with The Dog in the Night is just 1 long stanza. So within your essay, you're going to have to figure out where your paragraph breaks are going to be, where you're finding the kind of the natural breaks within the poem. So a little more challenging on that side. But every poem on this group kind of has its own challenges. Some are kind of short, and you kind of think, well, how can I get 800 words out of this one, right? Generally, word count's not a problem with The Dog in the Night. It's a longer poem. Lots of stuff going on there to think about and try and figure out. Numerology by Kathleen Harris, talking about turning 7. It's kind of deceptively, looks simple at first, but then you get into it, it's like, well, wait a minute, what's happening, especially towards the end. A couple of poems like that here. The Descent, probably the most ambiguous of these poems. William Carlos Williams is a very experimental poet sometimes, and you can see him experimenting here about how the poem looks on the page. So you have this indentation, and the punctuation's awkward. Periods are kind of everywhere. It's kind of a very interesting poem, but if you read this poem, you kind of go like, I don't know. You might not want to pick it. If you kind of read the poem, kind of like, I like this. I'm not sure why. Those are the kind of poems that usually work well for explication. So you're going to get in there and try and figure out what's happening in the poem and why you're responding the way you do. This be the simile. This is not written by Philip Larkin. When somebody says with apologies to Philip Larkin, they're kind of referring to the work of that poet and kind of saying, hey, I'm kind of borrowing an idea here. This one's borrowing from This Be the Verse, a poem by Philip Larkin. But again, this is an unpublished poem, and this is just not written by him. This one's kind of shorter, which makes it a little more challenging to get to the word count. So again, if you like me and you like to summarize things instead of expand on them, a shorter poem might be a little harder for me. If you're good at expanding on ideas and developing your ideas, a poem like this might work well for you. Demolition Derby, a poem by Sherman Pearl. Interesting. He likes to write about his relationship with his children, particularly his son. Very interesting poem. Another one with it's just 1 long stanza, so you got to figure out how you're going to put the paragraph breaks within your essay, and how you're going to organize your essay a little bit more than you might with another poem. But very interesting parallels between the Demolition Derby and relationships. Basic training. Again, this when you first read it, it's going to sound like the most obvious poem. Oh, it's just talking about basic training in the Army or something. But then all of a sudden, in the middle, things get a little complicated, and you got to try to figure out what's going on there. But 8 very good poems, are pretty interesting poems, good poems to work with. I've had good essays on all these. That's why I like to use them. And to kind of go over how to do a good explication, you're going to see a handout that says how to write a good poetry explication. So make sure you go through this. I'm not going to read this whole thing word for word. But the way an explication tends to work, one, you want to pick a poem, probably want to go ahead and print it if you can, and go through and mark in the margins how you're responding to things. If you're not used to annotating things you read, this is good practice with that as well. Make sure you look up words you don't understand. But again, you're not doing research for this. This is just you and the poem. There's no introductory paragraph. There's different types of explications. Some allow you to do that. I do not want an introductory paragraph. Do not put an introductory paragraph. The essay should start in line 1 of this poem written by this person, and you start telling us what happens in that poem or in that particular stanza. If you're going to go stanza by stanza, which I recommend. Stanza by stanza tends to work better, unless you get a poem with that's just one long stanza, obviously. No biography, nothing like that. Just start with the first line and get into your response to the poem. And again, it's not just your random response. This would be your informed response as a literature student, right? If you just kind of say, basic training is obviously about Obamacare, I'm going to be like, wow, this is going to be an interesting essay. And the trick is, as you start writing the explication, you're going to be using short quotes from the poem to support what you're saying. So, you can kind of say basic training is about Obamacare, but when you start trying to put quotes in there to support what you're saying, it's just going to fall apart, right? And also, eventually, I'll point out that the poem was written before Obama was president. But you're going to start with line 1. Take us through the poem as a straight line as possible. Don't jump around. Don't jump between stanzas, things like that. Just kind of straight line all the way through the poem. Don't skip major sections. That's kind of a flaw some students have. They don't understand a particular section, so they just don't talk about it. That's a glaring omission from the explication. And also, you make sure you're assuming that the only person reading the poems are people who've already read the poem. I'm reading your explication. They've already read the poem, so they understand what's happening in the poem. So you're writing to somebody who's already informed about the poem a little bit. Don't use I, you, or it. You need the poetry terms. This idea of using frequent short quotes is very important. One that keeps you focused on what you're saying. It also keeps the reader focused on where you're getting your ideas from. You probably might end up with a long quote. It depends on which poem, like Virginia Late Summer. There's a lot of very short lines. You might end up with 4 more lines and a quote or something. But don't just quote an entire stanza, then summarize the stanza. That's not the point of this. You want to take us line by line as you talk about the stanza. Use frequent short quotes to show us where you're getting your ideas from. Make sure you stay focused on analyzing the poem. Don't go off on tangents. Make sure you introduce and comment on any quote you use in your explication. Notice that's in all caps, underlined, and bolded. That's very important. Don't just throw a quote, as Sherman Pearl says, quote, and then move on. I'm like, what's that quote doing there? What they're supposed to support what you say, not say something for you, right? And when you end the explication, you end with the last line of the poem. No, don't go back and summarize what you've already said or summarize the poem again. No, this is a much different kind of essay than what we've been doing. There's no introductory paragraph. There's no concluding paragraph. You start with the beginning of the poem. You end with the last line of the poem. And that prevents students from kind of fluffing up the word count with, repeating yourself in the conclusion or something silly like that. Or introductions like, since the dawn of history, poetry has fascinated students. No, in line 1 of this poem by this person, what happens? Same thing at the end. You've got to try and find a good concluding thought and a good concluding sentence, but you're not going to do a conclusion where you summarize what you've already said. And you can see a good explication, or at least a functional one, up there on Material for Poetry Essay. On a poem by Robert Frost, obviously you don't get to choose this poem to work with. If you've never read The Road Not Taken, you might want to do that. It's in our textbook. You can just Google that. One of Robert Frost's more famous poems. Whoops. And again, I'm not going to read this whole sample essay line by line. You can read faster than I can talk. But you're going to notice the person's following those guidelines on the handout. You're going to start with the first line of the poem. This explication is organized by stanza, so the writer's going to spend a paragraph on each stanza as he or she goes through the explication. So in the first stanza of his poem, The Road Not Taken, Robert Frost presents a scene familiar to all people through the persona of a traveler. Again, no introduction paragraph, no telling us that Robert Frost read a poem at John F. Kennedy's inauguration or silly stuff like that. Just focus on the poem, kind of start on line 1 and take us to the end of the poem. Our traveler uses first-person narration to present us with the metaphor of two roads diverging in a yellow wood, a metaphor that represents the proverbial fork in the road we all encounter when making a life decision. In lines 2 and 3, we find our traveler must make a choice and cannot remain static. Then there's another short quote. You're going to notice very quickly, ellipses and brackets are your friends with this essay. Sometimes you might have to change a verb to make it grammatically in sync with the rest of your sentence, or just for the quote to make sense. You might end up stopping in the middle of a line, which is, my mouth stopped there. This is what these ellipses are showing. Also notice a few things. When you're quoting from the poem, you're citing using line number. So that 1 is line number 1 from the poem. You can also do that in the introduction, like here in lines 2 and 3. And I give the quote right there. And it's good to mix it up a little bit so it doesn't sound formulaic as you go all the way through. But notice frequent use of short quotes to show the reader where you're getting your ideas from, and also to keep maybe you focus on the poem as you're writing. If you just start writing and kind of go off on a tangent and you can't support it with a quote, that's a good warning sign that you've gone into left field there for a second. But give the quote, or the writer gives a quote and starts discussing that quote. The persona's point suggests that even if we decide not to choose, we're still heading down a path, and continues the discussion there. Then all of a sudden, two paths diverged in a yellow wood. Whenever you hit a color, like black balloons or something like that, you want to stop and you want to analyze that color. Make sure you tell the reader what that color is doing in that poem, and that's what exactly is happening here. So spending quite a bit of time on those first 2 lines in that stanza, right? And kind of explaining what the quotes mean and kind of unfolding that poem and discussing how all this is starting to relate to each other and maybe some of the major themes within the poem. We get down to towards the end of the paragraph, you kind of see we're getting to the last line in the stanza, to where it been in the other growth and discussing that quote. And then the second stanza starts with the second paragraph of the explication starts with the second stanza in the poem. So you kind of see organizing paragraphs by stanzas is a neat way to do it. Again, you can't do that with all the poems that you get to choose from there. But in the second stanza, ambivalence changes to ambiguity. Both roads appear to be equally untraveled. The first road bent in the undergrowth, yet the narrator finds the second road just as fair and perhaps having the better claim. And basically what the writer of this explication is going to do is start saying, hey, both these roads looked exactly the same when the narrator had to make a choice. And basically we justify our choices later on after we've made them, because at the time you don't know which one's going to be the better one. Kind of like when they ask you, what's your major? And you're like, and then you had to make a choice out of all the majors, other majors you had to choose from. And you don't know where that choice is going to lead you. And that's kind of what the writer's saying the point of this poem is. And taking this line by line and then organizing paragraphs by stanza. But notice frequent short quotes to keep us focused on where they are. Also with the short quotes, make sure you use the slash to show the line break. That's what that slash is doing there. But again, you kind of see changing out how we're citing it. Sometimes doing it in the introduction, sometimes doing it after the quote. It's kind of up to you, but it's good to mix it up a little bit. And again, you got to notice those brackets help quite a bit to keep the quotes grammatically in sync with the rest of what you're saying. I'm not going to keep reading this whole thing to you, but kind of notice how this quote works. Notice the stanza by stanza organization of the paragraphs. But notice within those paragraphs, the writer is going through line by line and telling us what's happening in the poem. With this particular explication, the writer takes us back to the title. The Road Not Taken is the title, not The Road Less Traveled, which is how it's often interpreted. And the writer's just kind of going to finish on that thought. But again, no concluding paragraph, no biography, no introductory paragraph. just focused on a line-by-line analysis of the poem. And again, it's this poem limited to that stanza, spinning a paragraph on each stanza in the explication. All right. That's what we're looking to do with the explication. It's not easy. It's easy to get to about the first 500 words, and it's like, what do I say now? But make sure you go back, look at any lines you might have skipped, any words you didn't understand and just kind of skipped over, and start, look those up a little bit. Make sure you understand the different words within the poem and how they're functioning, and how the different images and colors and ideas that are being presented kind of work together to produce whatever effect you think is happening in the poem. But we're going to stop it there. If you have any questions, be sure to let me know, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.